what's your biggest challenge when it comes to literacy centers? These are some of the topics that we're going to tackle today on the podcast as we talk about the best learning center strategies for first grade. So let's get started. If you ask teachers about how they run their literacy centers, you're going to get lots of different opinions. Some teachers swear by the daily 5. Other teachers are going to tell you weekly centers are the way to go. And some teachers talk about must do, may do. And others are going to tell you monthly centers are the way to go. I've tried some of these different options, but before I tell you what worked the best for me, let's just talk about what all of these are and what they mean. So first of all, the daily 5 has been around for quite a while. It's based on a book that's written by Gail Boucher and Joan Mosier, and it basically tells you that your centers should be based on 5 components that kids will interact with every day, which are read to self, read to someone, listen to reading, word work, and writing. This is a relatively easy way to set up your centers with really fairly low prep for the teacher, and I think it can work in first grade with a little bit of modifications. I used parts of this method in my centers, but honestly, the problem for me was the read to self and read to someone areas. You really have to work up to this in first grade because most kids come to you as non-readers, and it takes a long time really before kids can read independently for any length of time. But the thing about literacy centers is that you really shouldn't start them on the first day of school because you have to teach kids how to work independently and how to use the centers appropriately. So while you're working on this, you can have kids practicing to build up their stamina to read to themselves for a while. The goal is to get kids to be able to work or read independently for 15 to 20 minutes. And even though kids can work at a word work center or even a writing center for 15 or 20 minutes, getting them to read to themselves for that long or read with another person for that long is really challenging. And that might not happen until midway through the year. So for that reason, the daily 5 really never worked for me. Another method that some teachers use is called the must do, may do method. And so basically what that means is that teachers will structure the time so that there's certain activities that kids have to do during center time. And then if time allows, there are things that the kids may do after they finish the required work. Typically, to set this up, teachers might make some kind of rotation chart that shows what the kids must do first. And that might be 1 or 2 things. And then they'll have the optional may do activities on the chart that kids can pick from afterwards. So for instance, for the must do activities, you might have things like a phonics page, or maybe they have some unfinished work that they need to do before they can go to a may do activity. Maybe you want them to read a decodable book or answer some comprehension questions. Really, the must do all depends on what you're currently working on in class and what each kid needs to work on. Then the may do activities are likely more hands-on things like maybe play a phonics game or listen to a book on tape or maybe go to the writing center. I think the thing I like about the must do, may do centers is that teachers are differentiating the must do activities. Some teachers are going to have a folder for every kid, and that's where their must do activity for the day is placed. So the folders are differentiated to meet the needs of every kid in your classroom. And I think that's so important to be able to differentiate for kids so that they can work on their own level. But because it's differentiated, it's very hard to have the must-do activity be anything but really a worksheet. If every kid has their own must-do folder, then it's basically a worksheet that they're doing. And I don't love that for center time. For me, I always felt that center time should be all about practice and feel a little bit more like play to the kids, because then they want to do it. They actually look forward to it. I suspect the kids who have a must-do folder sort of dread that part of center time, and it might lead to more dawdling and daydreaming and not actually working. But that's just my opinion, and I could be wrong because I never really used this method in my classroom. I know that there are lots of teachers who use this method and they love it. And also, you don't have to have a must-do folder. Maybe your must-do activities are reading a book or playing a phonics game. And if you paired the kids up by ability, you could have them have a must-do activity that could be a partner game, and that would feel like more fun to the kids. They'd still be differentiated and practicing a skill, but it would feel more like play and more enjoyable for the kids. So maybe in that case, you could have a stash of phonics games of some sort. You could have games ranging from alphabet recognition to CVC words to blends or digraphs or whatever. And then the must-do activities would be directed toward whatever game you wanted them to play that day. So there's lots of different ways to do a must-do, may-do system, and it might work for you. So for me, I guess I did a sort of combination of these methods, really. The one thing that was the most important to me was the time that I was spending with the kids in my small group. I knew for certain that those 15 to 20 minutes with me were going to be quality instruction for the kids. But the age-old question is, what's the rest of my class doing during that time? And no matter what you do, it's never going to be perfect because they are 6-year-old kids, and the only thing kids really want to do is play. So if they're doing something that they think is boring, they're going to figure out a way to make it feel like play. Like you may tell them that they need to do this certain phonics worksheet, but the minute you turn your back, some kids are going to pretend that their crayons are little people or soldiers or whatever, and they're going to ignore the phonics worksheet. I mean, not every kid is going to do that, but especially your struggling learners. And they're really the kids who need the most help of all. And so handing them a worksheet to complete isn't always the best option, even if it's differentiated for their level. The other thing that was important to me was how much time it was going to take me to get the materials prepped for every day, because let's face it, there's never enough time. We got 40 minutes of planning time a day, and that was barely enough time to write my lesson plans, copy and prep all my whole group activities, grade papers, and write my small group plans for each week. We all know there's way more than that you have to do every week, so planning for centers or changing stuff daily or even weekly was a lot. So here's what I did. I had 10 centers in my room, and that may seem like a lot, but several of them were basically no prep at all. I had a classroom library, a listening center, computers, tablets, an art center, math, word work, writing, a big book and retelling center, and a spelling center. I tried lots of different options over the years of how I'd set up my stations, and I'd have the kids rotate and all of that. And the best thing that I came up with that worked for me for many, many years were monthly centers. When I first started using centers in my classroom, it felt like it was a never-ending battle. You know, I was trying to plan different games and activities for a bunch of different centers every week, and it was so much work. Then once I finally figured out what to put at my centers, then I had to gather up all the materials and set it all up. And I was trying to do that every week. And honestly, I was getting burned out very quickly, and I didn't want that to happen because not only did I have to figure out what the rest of my class was going to do while I was in small groups, but I also really wanted it to be something that the kids were going to enjoy and be learning at the same time. So I knew there had to be a better way, and that's when I decided I was only going to change out my centers once a month. That's a total of 9 or 10 days out of the entire school year that I had to change my center materials, and I knew that, I could handle that. So here's the benefits of only changing your centers monthly. Number one, it saves you time. Teachers have way too much on their plates every day. Lesson plans, copies, papers to grade, collecting data, going to grade level meetings, planning for differentiating. I mean, the list goes on and on. And so when you only have to change your centers once a month, it's so much easier and more manageable. All right, number two, you can have seasonal themes when you have your monthly centers. I used to like making my centers revolve around the month. Like my October centers would have a fall theme, and I'd make games with pumpkins or leaves or fall themed books and stuff like that. But in January, they'd have more of a winter vibe. I used to scour the Dollar Tree every month, and I'd find all sorts of things that I could use to make different games. In the fall, I'd find little pumpkins or leaves or acorns, and they could become game tokens and counters and stuff like that. You can find the cutest stuff at places like Michael's or Hobby Lobby or Dollar Tree. And whenever I made a game with little seasonal stuff like that, it made the activity way more interesting to the kids. They would get super excited when I put out the new activities at the beginning of every month. If you want to see them, all of my monthly centers are in my TPT store, and you can take a closer look at them at firstieland.com/learning centers. All right, number three, when you use monthly centers, you're never going to have to think about what you're going to put at your centers. It takes a little bit of work up front to get your centers made for each month, but once you have them, you can reuse them year after year. When I planned out my center activities for each month, I always kept in mind what I'd be teaching during that month. Because once you're in a grade level for a while, you begin to realize that you kind of teach the same skills at the same time every year. Like in first grade, you're going to teach CVC words in September, but by the time you get to January, you're going to be working on digraphs and words with endings. So I made my center games accordingly, and then that's how I stored them. Now, if I had kids who were still working on CVC words in January, I could always mix some of those activities in with what we were currently working on in class, so I could very easily differentiate for everybody, no matter what their skill level was. All right, number 4, you're going to have more room for storage, and the setup is quick and easy. I kept all of my materials for every center together in one box for each month. I had these Rubbermaid under the bed storage boxes, and I had one for every month. So I kept everything, all the games, art projects, books, all the CDs, everything that I was using for centers for each month, I kept them in that box. So at the beginning of each month, I just pulled out that month's box, and I could set up my new centers very easily in one planning period. All right, my 5th reason for why I loved using monthly learning centers was because I spent way less time explaining the centers every week. Once a month, I'd set my new centers up on a Friday when my kids were at special. And then when they came back, I'd walk around and I'd show them the new games and activities, and I'd explain how to do each one. Then I'd do a quick review again on Monday before we started center time, and that was usually all it took. The games might have been a little bit new to the kids, but the skills weren't new. They were always skills that we'd already been working on in class, so they understood what to do. And that was it. I only had to set my centers up once a month. I usually had at least 4 or 5 activities at every center, so it was always enough to keep the kids busy at the center for the entire, 15 to 20 minutes that they were there. And I made sure that I had differentiated the games so that there were things for every kid to do. And then I also had stuff at each center that never changed. For instance, at my math center, I'd have the monthly math games, but then there were always math tubs with pattern blocks or 𝗰𝗵𝗀𝗄𝑥 cubes and stuff like that. So if the kids finished the games early, they could always play with the manipulatives. So I guess that was my version of must do, may do. They knew they had to play the new games and the activities first before they could play with the manipulatives at the center. And then in terms of how kids rotated to the centers, I had one kid at each center. And I did that because I found that when kids work together, they just make too much noise. And honestly, it drove me crazy during small groups. So because I had 10 centers, I could have 10 kids at centers, and then usually 5 or 6 with me. And then the rest would usually be doing a worksheet or something at their table, or maybe reading silently from their book box. So that's how I got a little version of Daily 5 into my centers, with kids reading to themselves, or when they were at centers, they might be at word work or writing some days. I didn't meet with every child every day in my small group. I usually had 3 rotations, so my struggling readers would meet with me every day, and my on-level kids would meet with me maybe 3 days a week, and my advanced readers usually only met with me once or twice. The rest of the time they were at centers, reading to themselves or doing a worksheet. Every kid had a center log, and it had pictures of all 10 centers on it. And so during their center time, they could choose whatever center they wanted to go to, and at the end, they had to check it off. They knew they couldn't go back to that center until they'd done all the centers on their log. So basically, everybody went to each center twice during the month, which was fine because a lot of times they didn't get to do all the activities, and so they could do them the next time that they went to the center. Honestly, my kids really loved center time because all the centers were super engaging, and they just couldn't wait to go to them. Plus, they always got time to do a little quiet reading and practice the skills sheet, so it was just a win-win all the way around. So just to recap, there's lots of different ways to manage your learning centers, but in my opinion, monthly centers are the way to go. It's going to save you time. You can have seasonal or holiday themes, which the kids love. You never have to think about what you're going to put at your centers because once you have them made, you can use them year after year. And you'll have more room for storage when you keep everything all together and set up. It's just easy and quick. Plus, you're going to spend way less time explaining to the kids what they have to do because you explain everything at the beginning of the month, and that's it. I know that was a lot, and I do have several blog posts written about how I ran centers in my room, so I'll put the link in the show notes for those. And if you want to learn more and see everything in a more detailed way, you can check them out on my blog because I've got all sorts of pictures and everything on there. If you want to see all of my monthly learning centers, you can find them at 𝗺styland.com/learning centers. Okay, friends, that's it for today. If you ever have any questions about running centers, you can always send me a message on Instagram at 𝗺styland. So until next time, remember to make learning feel like play, and I'll see you next week.